One Texas region is highly exposed to oil and gas employment, and its housing market is strongly tied to the price of crude. What Texas has long marketed low taxes and relatively affordable land, and construction surged in many fast-growing markets during the recent boom. Builders and buyers both leaned on the assumption that growth would keep outpacing supply. Now that same growth is exposing cracks in 5 specific towns, each vulnerable for a different reason, and one carrying more of those risks than the rest. Why stay for the last one? Based on the risk factors ahead, it's tied to a kind of exposure none of the other 4 towns share, and the reasoning behind that is worth understanding before you look at any Texas market the same way again. Town 5, Austin's outer suburbs. Round Rock, Pflugerville, and Leander added housing quickly during the 2020 to 2022 boom, riding the pandemic-era migration surge into the Austin metro. Builders responded to that surge the way builders usually do, by permitting and constructing as much new inventory as they could sell at the time. As that surge faded, demand in parts of the outer suburbs cooled. Zillow's most recent data puts Austin's average home value at about $510,722, down 5.4% over the past year. That's a real, measurable decline. Central Austin has land scarcity working in its favor, which tends to support prices there. The outer suburbs, where most of the new construction landed, don't have that same floor underneath them. Homes in the area sold quickly during the boom, often at or above asking price. That pace has slowed as new construction continues to complete in a cooler market. Builders who locked in land and permits years ago are still finishing subdivisions today, even as buyer demand has thinned out, which keeps adding supply at exactly the wrong moment for sellers trying to hold their price. For some owners who bought near the top of the market, that decline means less equity in their homes than they had a year or 2 ago. That shift changes the calculus for anyone thinking about selling soon, since a smaller cushion leaves less room to negotiate on price or absorb closing costs without coming out of pocket. That's the mildest town on this list. It gets more exposed from here. Town 4, Sweetwater. Sweetwater picked up some momentum from regional wind energy development, and its low prices drew buyers priced out of Dallas and Austin. Zillow reports Sweetwater's average home value at about $108,029, down 4.2% year over year, a real softening in a market that looked stable not long ago. Part of what makes that number move is the size of the market itself. Sweetwater is a small town, and only a limited number of home sales close there in a given year. In a market that size, a handful of sales can shift the median noticeably, even without a major change in the local economy. Some of the jobs tied to wind energy construction are seasonal or project-based by nature. Once a project wraps, crews often move to the next site rather than staying to buy a home, which can limit how much of the newer housing stock finds a lasting owner. A similar pattern can show up in other small energy-adjacent towns in Texas, though every local market has its own mix of factors, and Sweetwater's exact numbers shouldn't be assumed to apply elsewhere. Sweetwater is soft because it's small. The next town is soft because its buyers don't have to be there. Town 3, Zapata. Zapata sits on Falcon Lake near the border, and its housing market has drawn interest from second home buyers and retirees seeking lakefront property well below coastal prices. Zapata isn't a large or especially diverse job market, so its housing demand appears to lean more on discretionary buyers than on people relocating for work. Markets like this can look stable during good years and then soften quickly once the buyers driving them decide to hold off. That distinction matters. A second home is generally easier to walk away from than a primary residence, and when financing gets more expensive, discretionary purchases are often the first to be delayed or canceled. There's a local factor too. Falcon Lake's water level fluctuates with drought conditions, and a lower lake can make a lakefront property less appealing at exactly the moment buyers are already hesitant. Combine softer discretionary demand with that kind of seasonal pressure, and Zapata's market carries more downside risk than its size alone would suggest. None of that means Zapata is guaranteed to struggle every year, but it does mean the town has fewer buffers than a market where most buyers are purchasing out of necessity rather than preference. Zapata is exposed because its buyers are optional. The next town is exposed because one industry runs almost the whole economy. Town 2. Pecos. Pecos sits in the Permian Basin, one of the most active oil-producing regions in the country, and its housing market has historically tracked drilling activity closely. Housing demand in towns like this is closely tied to rig counts and local drilling activity. Some housing forecasts suggest Pecos could see price weakness in the near term, though these projections vary by source and aren't based on one single agreed-upon model, so none should be treated as a settled outcome. During past oil booms, rents in Pecos are reported to have climbed as crews moved in and available housing tightened. An economy this concentrated in one commodity tends to move in a single direction at a time. When drilling activity slows, the jobs-supporting local housing demand tend to slow with it. Housing built for previous booms, including temporary worker housing, can sit underused when drilling activity cools. Some analysts point to that kind of unused inventory as one factor that can weigh on pricing across the wider market during downturns. In towns like Pecos, that inventory doesn't disappear once the boom ends. It just sits there competing with every other listing for a much smaller pool of buyers. 4 towns down, each exposed for a different reason. The last one combines several of them at once, and the mechanism behind it is different from anything already covered. Town 1. Midland and Odessa. Midland and Odessa are widely described by researchers, including Texas A&M's Real Estate Research Center and the Dallas Federal Reserve, as unusually concentrated in oil and gas employment, with local housing conditions closely tied to energy cycles. Home prices, sales, and employment here respond to oil prices and drilling activity more directly than in most diversified metros, according to Dallas Fed reporting on the Permian Basin. Look at the last major cycle. During the years crude traded above $100 a barrel, both Midland and Odessa saw strong job growth as drilling activity ramped up. When oil prices fell, that growth reversed just as sharply, and local housing demand cooled right along with it, since fewer jobs in the area meant fewer people looking to buy or rent. More recently, the Dallas Fed reported Midland-Odessa home prices up more than 10% year over year in one recent reading, and other periods in the region's history have shown notable price weakness instead. That kind of swing reflects both a thin market, where a handful of sales can move the median, and a genuine underlying sensitivity to the energy cycle. A housing market this concentrated in one industry doesn't behave like a typical, diversified metro. It tends to move further in both directions than markets with a broader economic base. Midland and Odessa aren't guaranteed to fall further from here, but based on how concentrated their economy is in a single industry, this market appears to have the least insulation on this list if oil prices turn down. A diversified metro can absorb a slowdown in one sector because other industries keep buyers in the market. A region built this heavily around one commodity doesn't have that same cushion, which is exactly what makes it different from every other town on this list. 5 towns, each carrying a different kind of risk: overbuilding, thin markets, discretionary buyers, or dependence on a single industry. Of the 5, Midland and Odessa are the only one where nearly every one of those risks overlaps in the same place. That's where the data stands right now.